Hi, I'm Rob Plevin from Needs Focused Teaching, and in this video I'm going to be talking about something of crucial importance, your classroom management plan. What it is, why you need it, and how to put it together. So what is a classroom management plan? Well, basically it's the foundation of an organised, well-behaved classroom. It details your rules and expectations for appropriate behaviour, together with the routines and procedures that will help students meet those expectations. And finally, it covers your responses, the consequences you will use for students who don't manage to meet those expectations. Its purpose is to provide consistency and structure in your classroom and in your teaching. It's to help you prevent and prepare for behaviour problems, for any and all eventualities in terms of student behaviour. And also, its purpose is to pass accountability to students, to enable them to take responsibility for their own learning and for their own behaviour. Now, done right, this can save you thousands of hours over the course of your career. It can help your students learn and achieve much more than ever before. So let's have a quick look at how to do it. So do you need one? Well, that depends. If your students already know what's expected of them from lesson to lesson and day to day, and if your classroom runs smoothly without you having to intervene with students who aren't behaving appropriately, and if you're able to adapt to any and all behaviour problems which you come up against in your classroom, then perhaps not. But I don't know many teachers who are in that situation. The point of this is that a well thought out classroom management plan is of benefit to you as well as your students. Firstly, because it enables you to teach with cool, calm confidence. That calm confidence that comes from knowing exactly what to do no matter what happens in your classroom. And secondly, it takes you from being very reactive to being more responsive. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So you know those times when your most difficult students start to challenge your authority and you don't know what to do. You struggle. You can feel the situation getting worse and worse, but you're just left floundering. What consequence do I use? What do I do if it gets any worse? And you can see it escalating, and you get that sense, that feeling of being out of control. Well, in this state, without a plan, we react. We just blindly react. And we're a model of inconsistency in that state. So we actually encourage more problems. We encourage students to push harder and press further. So this inconsistent approach comes around through not having a plan. And once you get to that state, once students start to see that you haven't got a plan, that you're not this calm, confident, consistent leader, then your reputation spreads. And that's what I mean by encouraging more misbehaviour. You get students arriving at your lesson ready to push your buttons because they know they can get away with it. Young people need clear, firm boundaries. And they need to know what will happen if they cross those boundaries. And they need a teacher who's a leader, who can lead them calmly and confidently. And that's what a classroom management plan can bring about. So let's have a look at your classroom management plan. Now, there are actually 4 components to this, although I've left the top one off. The first bit is that bit that should be going on all the time in your classroom, the preventive strategies, our needs-focused preventive strategies. So that's things like clear communication, positive praise, relationships. Those kinds of things need to be in place as part of your classroom management plan. But what we're dealing with here is your rules, your routines to help students meet those rules and expectations, and the responses that you'll put in place for students that don't manage to follow those rules and routines. And of course, routines is actually one of our preventive strategies, but we're dealing with it here separately as part of our classroom management plan. Now, we'll start with rules, and I think the best way I can explain this is by showing you an example of bad practice. So here's a list of rules that I wouldn't advise using. These are Mr. Plevin's rules. Don't call out, don't leave without permission, don't use equipment without permission, do not use bad language, do not leave bags on the floor, do not ignore the teacher, do not blah, 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 blah. Moan, moan, moan. Okay, very, very negative. That's the first thing we can see about this. And you'll know from some of my other videos and books that the heart of the needs-focused approach is about creating positive relationships with your students. It's about creating a positive classroom environment. And it's very hard to do that if you're moaning at them all the time. The other thing is that there's a lot of rules here, and once you get past 4 or 5, your students really don't pay attention anymore. It's very hard for them to remember past 4 or 5 rules, and it's very hard for you to enforce past 4 or 5 rules. It just becomes a long, long moan and lecture. So they're the first 2 things wrong with this. And the third one is that we're using vague terms throughout this, things like respect, respectfully, respect others. And those kind of vague terms mean different things to different people. So unless I clarify what is meant by respectfully, what's meant by quietly, what's meant by appropriately, then perhaps some of my students won't give me the kind of behaviour that I'm expecting and wanting. So it's okay to use those terms as long as you've explained exactly what they mean. So just to recap, these are bad rules because there's too many of them, they're very negative, and we're using vague terms which perhaps haven't been explained beforehand. What we're trying to do is create a positive environment while ensuring that our students follow our rules and our routines. So it's best to focus on the behaviour you want to see rather than behaviour you don't want to see. So let's now have a look at a set of rules that might work a little bit better. Right, so here's Mr. P's better rules. So I'll read through these quickly and then we'll go through the process in a bit more detail. 1. Follow instructions first time. 2. Take part in activities and complete set tasks. 3. Use materials correctly and safely. 4. Use polite language. And 5. Face the teacher when he or she is talking. Now this particular set of rules, or slight adaptations of them, have served me really, really well in my classroom over the years in a whole manner of different settings. So how do you come up with rules? How do you actually phrase them? Well, first of all, try and think in terms of conveying those positive expectations that you want in terms of appropriate behaviour and in terms of creating that learning environment. And remember what we said about the bad set of rules? We had too many there, so we're keeping it to 4 or 5 succinct rules. We're phrasing them positively. None of these are phrased in the negative sense. They're all positive actions that we want our students to take. So we're focused on the things we want them to do rather than those we don't want them to do. And any vague terms, such as use materials correctly and safely, they will be explained to my students. We can't really get away with using those vague terms completely, but it's fine as long as you explain what that means. So in terms of, say, a science lab, I'll explain exactly what is meant by correctly and safely in terms of using particular scientific equipment, or in the computer lab in terms of using technical equipment. Now, when it comes to introducing these rules to your students, that's where we sometimes hit a bit of a brick wall. Because as you'll know, our students are very suspicious of anything which they feel is controlling in any way. So they'll question it if you come in too hard with your rules. So there's a couple of things you can do to get over this brick wall, to get through this hurdle. And the first is the way you introduce these rules to your students. So when you sit them all down quietly and you start to talk about these rules, it's a good idea to say something along the lines of, now my job is to help you succeed. My job is to help create a classroom where you feel safe, where you won't be ridiculed or threatened, where there'll be no bullying going on, and where the conditions are such that you can learn new things. And that is why we've got these rules. So it really helps first and foremost the way you introduce those rules. Make it all about them. Let them see that you're doing this to help them. It's not about you having a nice tidy classroom and an easy job. It's about creating conditions where they can succeed. You want to help them. And the second thing you can do is you can give a reason or a number of reasons behind each of these rules. I'll give you a few now, for example. People tend to listen more if they understand the reasoning behind certain actions. So this first rule, follow instructions first time, I could ask my students, why do you think we have this rule? Or I could say something along the lines of, well, you know, we have instructions, we have rules, we have guidelines to help the world run smoothly. For example, how would it be if you were on the football pitch or the hockey pitch and you didn't follow the rules, or you didn't follow what the referee said? It's going to be chaos. So we need to be able to follow instructions, and it's best if you can do it first time, and then we don't get into one of those long conversations where I give you loads of warnings and you eventually get into trouble. Number 2, taking part in activities and complete set tasks. Now I know that you all work at different rates, so I want to give you a personalised work target or task each lesson. I also want you to succeed, I want you to learn, so I'm doing this for your benefit. It's up to you to take part, and it's up to you to complete that task in the allotted time. Number 3, using materials correctly and safely. Well, we have this rule so that things don't get broken and so that people don't get hurt. I don't want to be giving you or your parents a bill at the end of a science lesson for a load of glassware that's been broken. So we need to know how to use things correctly and safely. Number 4, using polite language. This is a life skill. You're not here in school just to learn how to do facts and figures. You're here to learn how to behave appropriately. And we're giving you skills that you can take out into the outside world. I wouldn't want you going into a restaurant, for example, and not knowing how to behave or how to speak politely to either staff or other guests. And number 5, face the teacher when he or she is talking. This is another life skill. It shows respect when you face somebody when you're talking to them, and it also shows that you're listening. It's very hard for you to speak to your next door neighbour if you're looking at the teacher when they're talking. So there are a few ways I could explain the reasons for my rules. Or like I say, I could ask their opinion. I could ask my students, why do we have these rules? The more you can get them to buy into them, the more chance there is that they're going to follow them. So that covers our rules. Now, we're also going to cover routines in a moment. And then the final part of our classroom management plan was consequences and responses. I cover those elsewhere in other videos, either online or in my various packages. And you'll also find some in my various books on Amazon. So I'm not going to do consequences and responses here, but in the next little bit we're going to look at routines. So routines as part of our classroom management plan. Now routines are a wonderful way of automating your classroom management. The reason so many teachers feel they have no control in the classroom is perhaps because they're so concerned with sorting out problems after they've happened. So they're trying to find ways to solve problems as they happen in the classroom. What routines do is they give you a way of preventing most of the problems you're likely to encounter. They do that by giving your students a set of clearly defined tracks or a clear roadmap to follow so that they know exactly how to behave in any specific situation or circumstance. So, for example, at the end of the lesson, before I put a routine in place, it was chaos. The bell would go and people would still be packing up and some would be running out the door and there'd be bags all over the floor and I'd be shouting at them to come back and I'd be repeating instructions again and again and again. Just total chaos. Even if I got them to start tidying up 5 minutes before the bell. Some people would be doing one thing while others were doing something else. Some didn't know what they were doing, so they're wandering around the classroom. And I'm constantly having to shout out all these instructions. With a routine in place, my students know exactly what they have to do at the end of the lesson. So in this case, 5 minutes before the end of the lesson, I'll direct my students to put all their equipment where they got it, to put their textbooks on the shelf and their exercise books on my desk, to clear the floor and their work area, and then to sit in silence facing the front and wait to be dismissed. Now that's great. I've got a routine that they can all follow at the end of the lesson. The magic in this is how you teach a routine. So I've identified that the end of the lesson is a very scruffy time of my lesson. It's one of those transition periods in a lesson where things go wrong. That's when things go wrong, isn't it? The transition periods from task to task, doing something differently, the start of the lesson, a change in activity, or the end of the lesson. That's when things tend to go wrong. So I've identified that I need a routine for that particular time. And what I will do is I will teach this routine to my students so they know exactly what is expected of them at each of these points. When we say put all the equipment where you got it, it goes on clearly defined shelves, labelled areas, it goes away. Putting textbooks on the shelf, again it goes to a clearly defined area. Exercise books on my desk in a nice neat pile. And I will demonstrate exactly what I want at each of these points. So for example, if I tell students to put their exercise books on my desk, some will get thrown there, some will get laid neatly at one end of the desk and some will go to the other. What I want is a nice neat pile in the centre of the desk. So I'll clearly define that, I'll show them what I want, and I'll demonstrate it, and then I'll get them to practice it. This is how I want you to put books on my desk. Clearing the floor and getting their work area tidy. I'll show them what I want, what is meant by a clear floor. This is how it needs to be at the end of the lesson. Otherwise, my interpretation of a clear floor might be very different to theirs, and there's an opportunity for an argument there. They can say it's clean while I say it isn't clean. So we'll agree on what is meant and what is required at each of these points. Once I've explained all that, and once they've practiced it and they know exactly what this means, this routine will get printed out and it will go on the wall at the front or the side of my classroom. And then, the next time it's the end of the lesson, 5 minutes before the end of the lesson, I'll just say to my students, okay, we need to follow the end of lesson routine. There it is. And they now know exactly what they have to do before that bell goes at the end of the lesson. And I've got a nice tidy classroom, all my equipment's away, my students are ready to leave. Now, that's how you teach a routine. That's how you establish a routine in your classroom. The beauty of this is that you can establish as many of these as you want. So for all those transitions and hotspots, start of lesson, end of lesson, watching a video, going to the library, going to the toilet, lining up for lunch, getting new equipment out, watching a video, all these different activities and transitions, they all have their own specific routine. The way you introduce them is one at a time. Don't try and do loads of routines at once because that will confuse them. Establish one routine, get it practiced until it's a habit, laminate it, put it on the wall, then introduce a new routine. Okay, we're now going to look at a routine for the start of lessons, and then putting equipment away, getting equipment out. And you work through all your transitions and hotspots that way, and before you know it, in a matter of weeks, you've automated your entire classroom management. So that's our classroom management plan. We've got our preventive strategies, we've got our rules and our expectations, we've got our routines, and we've got our responses and our consequences if students don't follow those routines. I hope you enjoyed that.